Oh,
Good evening. My name is Leticia Medina. I am an interviewer with the COVID-19 Oral History Project, directed by Dr. Whitney Chappell at UTSA. Today is November 13th. It is 2020. It is approximately 5:43 p.m. And my interviewee is Yasmin Barracudina. Say hello.
hello.
Great. So, Yasmin, I will begin the questions now. Remember that you are free to stop the interview at any time and to ask me to repeat any questions if you'd like. Okay.
Great.
Okay. So, tell me a little bit about where you grew up.
Where I grew up. Okay. Well, I grew up here in San Antonio, Texas. Um, we the first house I remember is in the South Side. Um, and I went to Sky Harbor Elementary. That was my first elementary school, and then we moved over here, like Jefferson High School area, and that's where I still reside.
You went to which elementary?
My first one was Sky Harbor.
Sky Harbor. Okay.
Yeah, Sky Harbor.
That is, I did, I didn't know that you grew up in the South Side.
Yeah, that's well, yeah.
We've known each other.
I know. Yeah,
Fellow Southsider. Okay.
there we go. Yep.
And tell me what are some of the strongest or more powerful memories you have of growing up in the neighborhood where you grew up?
Mm. um. Well, I remember it was it was obviously like before I was like um I was probably like 1 years old through maybe like 4 or 5. Um and yeah, I remember like that was we actually played with our neighbor kids, like we had playtime, and there was we had on one of our neighbors was a white family, and then another neighbor like right next to us was a black family. And I remember just being like really aware of like our color, our skin color very early, um very young. And I don't know. I mean, I haven't really talked about like childhood like that. And um I do recall several like drive-by shootings, and there was uh, probably more than I could count was at night. There was shootings, and they would hit our house or something, and we would just already know to go under the bed or drop down, in the middle of the night, or if we were like, walking around the house, like we already kind of knew to do that really, really young. Um, but I mean, it's such a mix of like beautiful memories and really trauma memories when you kind of like dissect it. I remember like always being fed, and just with my family, and having like that outside, like being like that childhood, like just childhood with the neighborhood kids, and we make up all these games and stuff. And I mean, it's really, like fun, like wholesome fun,
Mhm.
during the day. And then, another different story at night,
Wow.
Mm,
Thank you
yeah.
for sharing that. That those are powerful memories, and it's interesting to hear you talk about the joy and the danger
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. What's your family life like now? today, this day?
Today, like today. Well, my mom lives with me. She's elderly, and she is disabled from a previous neural um, uh, surgery, and so she does need, she does need care. She does a lot of stuff on her own. So yeah, I mean, I'm living with her right now. My sister's here in San Antonio also, and most of our like immediate families lives in Michigan, like on my mom's side. But like here right now in San Antonio, it's just me and my sister and my mom. Yeah.
Okay. All right. This closeness that you mentioned, that you remember from your childhood, have you, with your immediate family, managed to hold on to that closeness?
Yeah, I think we have. I mean, obviously like when like going through like the teenage years, there's always this like push and pull of like, of being,
I
this
think you're frozen.
young rebel.
Oh, you froze up a little. You said
Oh,
going
okay.
through teenage years.
Yeah. Like going through like through teenage years. I think I was going through my teenage years and my mom was probably going through like menopause. And so just that timing, we were just always fighting, and it was like to see our relationship now, I don't think people would ever believe that we didn't get along, so it's just really cool to see that, grow
Okay.
and manifest. Yeah.
When you think about who you are now, is there a person, or is there a specific group of people that you feel have shaped who you are, or a thing that has shaped who you are now?
Yeah, definitely my immediate family, my sister, my mom, my dad. My grandma had a huge impact on us. She would come, she lived in Michigan. She would come during the summers and visit us. So I remember her just always um, with us and present during the summers, even though we had the distance, she would always make sure that she had that time with us when we were young. And always have like projects for us to do around the house, wake us up early, have like food for us, but then have like a whole list of chores and stuff. So it was just always like, I knew when my grandma was here, we knew we were going to get fed well, but then also like work hard and then be like loved so much, um, and then the Esperanza Center has also a really big impact on like sense of community, social justice, Saranto Cultural Arts, the Guadalupe Center. But I definitely feel like the Esperanza Center is, like a lot, like very close to my family, because we didn't have a lot of family here in town. I think my parents they worked hard to develop those extended family, like through community work.
Okay. When you think about qualities or skills that you admire in yourself, which person brings to mind? Because I know that you must think about yourself all the time. I'm just kidding.
I'm like, huh. Okay, can you say that again?
Yes, when you think about qualities or skills that you admire in yourself.
Oh, in myself.
Yes.
Okay.
Who do you immediately think of or thank for those skills?
Yeah.
Those qualities.
I mean, my ancestors, all the women that have just survived and kept going, and crossed the border and continue to, raise their families, but also capture culture and pass it on. And yeah, I mean, my family, definitely my family. And then like community wise, I would think like Dr. Castañeda, Maria Berriozabal, just, I mean, they're just always going to be these like saints, you know, these like santas in my life. And yeah, and people that have passed too that have done so much that maybe I wouldn't have met, like Emma Tanuca, just historic figures that I wish I would have met. Mhm.
Thanks. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your background. I'm going
Yes.
to ask you questions now that are directly about or directly related to COVID-19.
Mhm.
What was your initial reaction? Can you describe your initial reaction when you heard an announcement about COVID-19 back in early, what, March? Is that when?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm, well, I don't know if I can say this out loud, but I was thinking we're effed. um, that's my initial like thought, you know.
And why was that your initial thought? What was it
Why
about?
why were we effed? Yeah.
What was it about the announcement that triggered that alarm in you?
Because of the administration and just already the neglect um of people of color's lives and everyone who lives on the margins in this society in the US. Um, and just seeing already what the last 4 years has shown, not just what the administration, but what family members and people that you everything that's been coming out. I think that was my first initial thing was, okay, this is gonna things are just gonna get like real. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that was, I think, a pretty common reaction. So over
Mhm.
the course of the following weeks and months after that initial "we're effed"
Yeah.
reaction, did your feelings change? And if they did, how did they change?
Um, I don't know if they changed. If I mean if I don't know if I changed from that like um yeah, I don't know if that changed my mentality changed because, you know, at during that during that same next couple of months we just see this like huge Black Lives Matter movement just resurging, and you know the support for Vanessa Guillen happening, and I was involved with some of the early organizing with that. So there was just so many like everything that was just like happening at the beginning of the year, or even 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Everything was just getting snowballed, like, you know, in this like couple of months. So I don't think I thought anything different than my initial reaction.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
When you hear COVID-19 now, does it still provoke the same level of alarm?
It I think it does. It definitely does because it's I, I've known just in the past week I know a few folks who have just lost family members to it. So I think it is maybe not that fear, but just like that constant, just this constant that's around, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
My condolences to your friends. I know
Hmm.
it's something that, like you said, is not seemingly is not waning.
Right.
Still
Hmm.
about COVID-19, what changed in your life in terms of work or just normal day-to-day routine after the initial announcements in March? Can you tell me about the changes that you made in your life?
Yeah. So I was so I was I'm full-time working, and then I was also working as a bartender part-time on the weekends. And my time that I had actually given them, I was actually going to be finishing, I wasn't going to be there past February, like mid-February. And so my last weekend that I was working at this bar was probably right around we heard of the first case in Seattle. And so that was kind of like the first thing, like when you just start seeing the timeline after that, I was like, I think I was starting to feel that fear for my, my colleagues in the service industry, and just how hard they were going to get hit so hard. And for me personally, I had a full-time job, and so we did get we were lucky enough to work from home, work remotely. I think I'm not very I don't do a lot of social stuff, so that part wasn't really affected. I think it was more of not being able to take my mom to events that she likes to go to. We did start ordering the groceries delivered. That was a big thing. Yeah, those two main things that kind of stuck out to me, working from home and not, just thinking second about any little task or errand that I had to do,
Mhm.
So, or oh, do I really need this? Or do we really need these things, and I was like, no, I don't. So really kind of prioritizing our needs, really.
Right.
And I did start gardening. I think that was my sister's idea. So that was, I don't have a green thumb, but I attempted to have a garden. So that was probably something that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for being able to be home. So.
And you said you attempted to have a garden. Was it a successful attempt?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
It's like, if you look at it, I don't think you would recognize what it is, it's things aren't really growing very good. So yeah, I don't have a green thumb. That's what I learned. That's one of the things I learned.
Sometimes
Yeah.
Learning that you can't do something, that's the lesson, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what, that was
Absolutely.
for me. Early on in the pandemic, what concerned you the most about COVID-19? What was your biggest concern at the time?
My mom, for sure. I think that throughout um, throughout the beginning and then to where we're at now, I think the demographics that were hard hit, which shifted. It shifted probably 3 times. So at the beginning, it was um, middle-aged folks that were going to be susceptible, and then it was elderly, and then there was a time that it was the young people, and then now it's the school-age kids. So it just kind of jumped to depending on what the local leaders were kind of enforcing, right? It really did. So but regardless of that, my mom was going to be susceptible no matter what, no matter what. And so, yeah, I think for me, that was my most immediate concern since the beginning and till today, right? So
you say that your mom stopped attending events
mhm.
when the lockdowns
Yeah.
happened. Has she resumed attending events, or is she still keeping herself physically distanced?
I don't think she's doing a lot of the virtual events. There's thankfully there's organizations and lectures and stuff are they're able to do on virtual. She does do a chair yoga for elderly folks, virtual like Zoom thing. So that's really cute. This she, early 70 woman, learning Zoom. She's like, I Zoomed today, and like that's so cool. So I think it's really interesting to see her as an elderly person, like limited, but she's learning like technology too, like different things. Like I didn't have to actually sit down and like walk her through it. Like she did it on her own. So yeah, I don't know. I forgot the question.
No, that was the
Okay.
question. Yeah, if your mom resumed events, but you're saying she did
Oh, right.
in a virtual way.
Right. Yeah. And I thought, yeah. And I was almost like thinking she would like push back, like, kind of like be pushing back against that, or like, because I hear of like other folks that have elderly family members, and they were like, I still want to go to the store. That's my like social time, or like, and I would be like, oh my God, that'd be so, I'd always have anxiety if she was like insisting on doing some stuff like that in person, so I'm thankful that she's just being as careful as she can, and not, trying to push the boundaries.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Good, good.
Mhm.
You mentioned that you early on you got used to ordering groceries online. Like that's one of the most common
Mhm.
the most commonly changed behaviors, right? So
All right.
you got used to ordering groceries. Have you now resumed going back to the store and shopping in person in the store?
Yeah, I have.
Do you remember when
Yeah,
you
I think it kind of goes back and forth. Like, there'll be sometimes that because it is a almost like $15 extra cost, added cost. Um, I mean, I think it kind of goes back and forth. It just kind of sees like, I mean, we'll do like one big grocery delivery so that we're just taking care of like for probably the whole month and don't have to worry about it. But um, yeah, and I don't know when I'll like just start going to this grocery store again, like for the big, for the big hauls. So,
yeah.
but I think it's nice that that we have that choice, and it's so more like easier now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you now do like small weekly trips to the store, either to the grocery store or Target or something like that? Sorry, I think my connection is kind
I mean,
okay, you're back.
oh, okay. um, I mean, not really. I mean, because we are doing like some so every now and then I'll have to like go to Lowe's for like a house thing or plumbing part or something. But those are like I have to go for that like one thing, So I do try to like if I'm out, I do try to like do a if I need anything from HEB, then I'll just loop around and go there since I'm already out, so that I'm not having to like, do multiple trips or like, you know, more than once a week. Hmm.
Okay. Okay. And then you also mentioned that you have cut down on socializing yourself. So what do you do to
Hmm.
time now that you're home so much more?
Oh well, I wake up early, and I do a lot of hikes with my friends. And I think, I mean, I've always been a big outdoor person and a big hiker, and just exploring a lot of the trails and parks that I am familiar with. And so I've just been really diving into that love of being outside, and really just taking my eyes off the screen, you know, and like being outside and having that fresh air and being able to like be with somebody, and you know that y'all are a little bit, you know, y'all are playing it safe, so it's a cool, a lot more people on the trails, um so that does it, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. What's
Mhm.
the biggest group that you've been hiking with? How many of you?
Oh, probably like 7, and that
Okay.
was like for someone's birthday. Yeah, that was for like a birthday, and it was, you know, folks.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think like folks really felt like it was really doable, you know, it was like safe, and you know, you're not sitting next to anybody, you're walking along, you know, everyone's giving each other distance, so it's, and you know, we're also like-minded folks, so it's not like we had someone in our group that was like didn't believe in science and was like being ridiculous about wearing a mask or something. So we all were like playing by the rules, and so that was very helpful also. I can't imagine having to deal with somebody like that. So
That's so cool. I find
yeah.
myself really appreciating nature a lot more. For the friends that for your friendships where you where hiking is just not possible, how are you keeping in touch?
Yeah. Well, I don't know anyone who doesn't hike with me. They know that they're gonna hike with me. I don't know. Um,
Okay.
that's a good question. I
So
don't
you're
know.
so
I
you
mean,
to, to keep your close friendships close because like you said, you're like-minded and
yeah.
everyone is like, yeah, down for a hike. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, I live right by Woodlawn Lake, and so, you know, for folks that don't want to necessarily do like a giant hike or something, like there's all sorts of very like intermediate trails for everybody, and Woodlawn Lake is perfect for just a quick little trip, little meetup. Um, yeah, I mean, or actually we'll like sit outside on someone's porch and just be outside, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do like those backyard hangs. Those are nice.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
In terms of your, you've shared with me how you have managed to keep your keep that closeness with your family and your friends. What about other relationships? Have you found that dating is challenging on
Oh,
the show? Oh,
yeah.
you thought I was going somewhere else.
I'm all, oh. Um, no, that's such a cool question because, you know, I think like, um, you know, I have like single friends and like folks that are like with in partners or relationships, but it's just always funny to like talk about like being COVID safe is very like the talk about like consent and being like sexually safe. So it's just like, okay, like what's your plan with like mask wearing? Like what are you know, so it's very like communicative. Even like when my sister comes to visit because she lives in another um household, right? So she's like, well, what are your mask wearing policy in the home, and like, you know, like stuff like that. So we just talk about how it's um that relationship is very like communication. There's so much like hardcore communication going on, you know.
Right at
Um,
the beginning too, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's like, oh, okay, well, oh, we're not ready to hug. Like, oh no, you know. So it's really like interesting, and yeah. I mean, I think that there was um I was dating somebody, and there was like, you know, I think like at the beginning it was like there was like that fear of like being like, okay, well, how are we gonna even do this? We're like living in two households, and and I think like it just really actually caused a lot more stress than we thought. And I mean, I'm not gonna say that that's the reason why it didn't work out, but I did hear from just like other folks that were probably doing like the dating on the apps and the online dating. And so it was really interesting to hear like, oh, so people are like really actually dating, like it was in like during COVID, like I was dating this person before. So there was like people like starting the dating like initiation, right? Like during COVID. So I didn't go through that personally, but I have friends that did, and it just was like, they would meet, I guess, like when restaurants would start opening, and it was just so like you actually have to talk to each other and get to know each other, and it was just hilarious. And yeah, I think that like we were just talking about like, oh, love in the time of COVID, that was such a big like thing right now. And it's just so funny. Like 2020 has just brought out so many interesting things about our society and people. Like some things just don't change, some things just don't change about us.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Remain firmly human.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Of being communicative about mask, what are the mask wearing regulations in your home? Now
Right.
that the holidays are coming up, what conversations are you having with your family about gathering?
Well, we don't, my family in particular don't celebrate Thanksgiving for our indigenous identity and politics. But for Christmas, our family really isn't here in town, so we don't really have like the big gatherings. But I think that it's, we wouldn't have that issue with particularly our family. Um, but I know that there's, so many family and friends that do like, I see my family in Michigan, and I'm like, I am concerned for them because they're big on like gatherings for everything, and so I'm concerned about, the folks that are going to have to confront that and probably have that, make that the priority of like, do we meet our social needs of like seeing each other, or do we, have like these really outside gathering? I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know how you'd go about that, or try to do a Zoom thing.
Yeah, I think it's a
Yeah.
it's a difficult time right now. Could you
Mm.
please tell me a little bit more about the reasons that you and your family don't celebrate Thanksgiving typically?
Uh-huh. Well, Thanksgiving is just um it's just not a holiday our families ever really celebrated. I think maybe when we were kids, and um I think there was just probably a time when my sister really started digging up like not our, but just like the history of what Thanksgiving means, and knowing that our family is like Apache and indigenous blood. Like, why are we celebrating like this holiday that has actually the demise of like our own people? Um and I think like slowly, I think like, I it was interesting that I believe it was my sister that was the first one to kind of start saying like things like F Thanksgiving, and then slowly I think that my parents started saying, yeah, this probably isn't the best holiday for us. But we would actually do like a hike to Garner State Park, or Los Maples during like that Thanksgiving weekend as a family. So it turned into like trying to have that like real traditional American theme to like, well, we have the time off, you know, everyone has the days off from school and work for us, for our family. So might as well be outside, and it's beautiful weather during that time. So yeah, and now it's, you know, it's really like, again, it's like just me and my mom, my sister. So we're like, it's fine. Like we don't need to like, you know, we spend so much time with each other like every week anyway. So for us, Thanksgiving is literally just another weekend or another day. But it would be a different story if we lived or visited our family in Michigan, where all of our family is. It'd be like we would involve ourselves with the holiday, obviously. So yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you for sharing that. Let me ask you a little bit about how you, and I'm going to ask you to recall the conversation we had yesterday. You mentioned something about how you wanted to maybe talk a little bit about how COVID-19 has impacted just members of the wider community that you're in. I think you mentioned something about
Mm.
a rental property.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. There's I think too, like COVID really did. I mean, for my immediate family, I think like there was um like always that like fear of like what it meant to catch it. Um because of my mom being elderly, so she was susceptible, and then my sister because she's immunodeficient, like deficiency, so she has those health issues that um oh my god, oh, my screen just like went dark. I was like, oh my god, you're able to see me still, right?
Yes.
Okay. um and so those were my initial like fears of like actually like my family members catching it. And then but then like we started realizing that um, we have a rental property not too far from my house right here, that that we realized that the service industry was going to get hit because you know, the bars, restaurants, everything just got closed. and and I knew that the renters, one of them is in the service industry, and that is her main income. That is her only income. And so then we hadn't even heard from them yet, and I think like I reached out, and like probably it wasn't even April yet, and it was already like significantly like, you know, people weren't going to the restaurants, so that significantly like dramatically changed her income. And I don't think there was like, you know, at that time we were just like, how do we handle this? Like, how do we handle this like as a landlord with consciousness, and knowing that like we're gonna be hit hard also like with, you know, this big monthly expense of owning this other home, and not being able to like have that income coming in the way we've been for the past couple years from this property. So there was just this like, we will try to find, like, I remember just like there has to be assistance. And so like, you know, my sister and I, we definitely just reached out to like all our friends and all our networks. I posted on Facebook. Luckily I have amazing friends that work in a lot of like social justice or organizations, or they know of some resources. And so there was quite a few of like resources that came through that were going to help with specifically renters, and then renters of service industry, and then because they are also undocumented folks. Um, so there was so much help, so much assistance that, I mean, none of us would have gotten through that. You know, none of us would have gotten through that. And, you know, it should have happened right at the beginning. And, you know, every level of government dragged their feet when it should have just happened when they knew that all these businesses were going to be closed. That would be dramatically affecting everybody, like everybody, you know? And I mean, I think like at that time, we just were realizing this huge domino effect of how everybody just instantly became affected. You know, I didn't lose my job, thank God, but I did lose income. And then we were still trying to find all these resources for this family so that they would actually have food to eat too. Like we just weren't like concerned about ours, right? We were just like, oh my God, that means they're not going to be able to like eat or pay their like CPS or, you know, just basic needs. So, I mean, that whole time I think was just like probably the most like stressed out we've ever been of like not just our family and like keeping a roof over our head, but like actually like a whole other family that, you know, we were just trying to be responsible, like responsible human beings. Like it's, I mean, it broke my heart to see people getting evicted. And I mean, just seeing those heartless acts, you know, really, it really shouldn't have come down to that at all, you know. And but I mean, luckily, luckily because of all the assistance, and then especially that the city was able to get the CARES Act. Um, we were one of the recipients of that money, so we were able to help the renters with that. Um, and then just, I mean, just the Martinez Street Women's Center, the Esperanza, like all these other organizations were able to like have like food boxes and, you know, HEB cards and things like that. These little things that were like, oh my God, they meant so much, you know. And I mean, there was probably like a good 2 months that um, we were getting the food boxes and then taking them to the renters. So we're like, let's make sure everyone's getting like, you know, everyone's just taking care of each other. And it really, like that really reinforced that community are the ones that are gonna help each other survive. It's not gonna be the government. So that was also very clear during this time. So, and that's why we are, you know, that's why we were able to get through this time.
Yeah.
Very,
Yeah.
very tough time.
And how is that family? Are they doing better now?
They're doing better. Her hours got, yeah, they did get, like her hours did get adjusted because they did slowly start doing like takeout, like to go stuff. And I mean, but still it's like, I think she did probably have a COVID scare. So there's, I mean, they're still like, they're not in the clear, right? And then she had to be off for like 2 weeks, I think, or 10 days. I don't know what. So it's like, she's not in the clear. She's in the service industry. Like that's one of the groups of folks that are also very vulnerable. So, you know, she didn't have access to the stimulus money that citizens did. So it was just all these hurdles that I know she was specifically, her and her family specifically had to get through. And so right now, yeah, they're doing a lot better. And you know, we're still trying to still find resources constantly because I mean, right now, right, we're still in November. We don't know how long this is going to be, right, or what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. I mean, so we're just probably really just preparing for a long haul kind of thing, you know.
Right. So you mentioned that early on, or there should have been better response from leadership at the very top early on. Do you feel hopeful that the new administration will do more or will be able to do more once the current administration finally concedes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough because, you know, we still have 2 more months in this administration, even though Biden is able to have all he's able to get his advisors and his task force and everything together. They really cannot move until there's a actual transition. And so I think like right now, like our country is so vulnerable on so many levels, like not just COVID, but like, you know, all the things that they also say is national security, like da da da, all these things are like, we're just so vulnerable right now. Like anything can happen and we're in, like, we don't know what we're doing. And so this is the time that things can be, you know, I mean, it's hard to say. It's really hard to say. So I want to be hopeful because there was such a strong such a strong such a strong push to get you know, it really wasn't that probably the folks that voted for him was, it was more to just get Trump out. And I think that we'll probably start seeing that come January, you know, if he does follow through with some of those promises. And really, it's like the people that were out there celebrating are going to be the same folks, you know, demanding, you know, what his promises were. So I want to be hopeful. I definitely want to be hopeful. But I think also, like what I said earlier, it's like it's going to be our gente, our community that's really going to come through before they do. So
It's true. It's
yeah.
true. It's true. And so far, I'm sorry, I'm distracted because there's an enormous.
Oh, I see it. I see it.
So you saw me like jump earlier.
I see it, but yeah.
It is. It's
I see it now. You're all rude.
Attacking me. Talking about vulnerable communities, how do you, or how secure do you feel in your current job? Do you feel that it's a secure one, and if so, why?
I do. Yeah, I do. Really grateful because there's I mean, my supervisor is constantly um um supporting, and she'll have your back. And really, I mean, if there's even like an inclination that there might be some changes, like, you know, there's so much transparency with at least with our team, you know, maybe not all across the board in that organization, but definitely in our team there's a lot of transparency and communication. And so I feel like if even if there is any changes that are like not in like maybe my favor, I think I would also get a support to, you know, to transition to something else. But yeah, I feel very like grateful that yeah, it's pretty solid right now. Yeah.
I'm glad you feel
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah.
It's a good thing to feel secure in some ways right now. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exact. However, I will add, oh, however though, because, and this is probably very like, I don't know if there's other like other agencies that feel this from working from home, but it's like it feels like there's like almost double the work load because of just like one small thing that I maybe could have just walked over to the actual office and asked, and then really gotten the answer or whatever, and boom, done, it would be done. But now there's, you know, connection issues, there's like, you know, maybe something needs to get updated, and then now I have to go call the IT people, and then, you know, it's like there's so many more steps, I feel like, working from home. and a lot more like, okay, there feels like there's more work, really, feels like there's more work. And I don't think that a lot of people are talking about that, like, from working from home. And you feel like there's just like not enough time, like even trying to get stuff done. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel the same way lots of times.
Hmm. Hmm.
With the latest news reports um, that we've heard during the past week on increasing COVID-19 cases and
Hmm.
different parts of the country, leaders in different parts of the country calling for more lockdowns.
Right.
Are you going to change anything that you're doing now going forward, or do you feel confident that you are taking all the necessary precautions at this time?
Yeah, I mean, I want to think, I want to think that the people that I am surrounding myself with, that it's a select few, and that those people are using just as the same precautions as I am. And, I think um, that if I didn't feel like safe with somebody like that, I don't think I would, actually be with them or in their space. Um, and so, like, for me, like, I think again, I don't know anyone else in like my group that doesn't feel that. And, you know, I mean, there might be like different levels of it, but, not someone that's completely against the whole, against like the believing of it and mask wearing and stuff. So I feel pretty confident in kind of like doing what I've been doing, is meeting my friends and family, like, on the porch, outside, wearing masks. I mean, we wipe down, like the door handles and stuff if someone does come in, or, I mean, we're pretty, we've, we've been doing it for a while, and I feel like we got it down pretty well. Um, yeah, but it's the like, I am reading that it is like those smaller family gatherings that is that is an issue, and that is unfortunately, it makes sense because everyone's coming from different households, and then you get comfortable, like completely comfortable. So I can totally understand that, and I just hope everyone's safe, this holiday. So
Well,
yeah.
thank you, and I hope everyone in your family and your immediate circles are safe and remain healthy.
Thank
Okay,
you.
the last question I have for you, um, if you could go back in time and talk to yourself before the pandemic, what would you
Uh-huh.
what advice would you give yourself based on everything you've learned in the last 9 to 8 months, 8 to 9 months?
I don't know. uh
I mean, beyond the obvious, right? Like wash your hands, don't touch your face.
yeah. Oh my gosh, I don't know. I feel like I've been I mean, I'm very privileged, and so I feel like I've been very privileged even during this time. And I I don't know if I would change anything. I mean, I feel like I've been very grateful to be working from home. I'm able to spend more time with my mom and be home and take care of like home stuff and projects. And I'm taking some online classes, and I finished my master naturalist certification. I feel like I've done a lot with my time, and so I don't, I feel like I've really kind of, I needed this almost. And again, in a very privileged place because, I personally haven't had any family members or friends that have passed, but I know so many that have lost family members and friends, close friends. And I think I was mentioning too the other day, like there was probably like of a stream of like 2 or 3 weeks that it was almost every day that I saw somebody posting that their relative or friend or somebody was passing on Facebook. And I mean, it just was like that doesn't go away. And it was just like constantly like, wow, that is really scary. Like I did have a cousin, one of my close cousins did contract it, but she, luckily she pulled through. And but during that time, I think it was like we were all like, we couldn't even go to the hospital, help her or see her, and I was thinking like, oh, do I need to fly to Michigan? And, so I got that like fear and like, but I couldn't do anything. I was like feeling helpless. So, but I mean, I'm just hoping that, again, like during this time, it's people are just following what they need to. And, really, I totally understand like social needs and wanting to see everybody and be with each other. Um, but it's just like the lives aren't worth it. Like we've seen enough. We've seen enough of that, of the loss.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. My heart goes out to
Mhm.
friends and family that are still dealing with these painful losses.
Mm.
But I also want to congratulate you on your Master Naturalist certification. That is so
Yes. Yes, thank you.
that is amazing.
Yes, thank you.
Congrats on that. Okay, so
Thank you.
I want to thank you so much for sharing your story, your experiences with me, and for this project.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah. It's a hey.
It's all Sherry, what?
Yeah. Oh my God.
And I would like to ask you if you would like to, if there's anything that you'd like to add at this point.
No, I almost forgot about the Master Naturalist certification, but I did. But I did like I kind of feel like I understood like what the high school students were feeling when they were like graduating, they didn't get their graduation. And because we were supposed to get like a little graduation ceremony too. And so I was really bummed about that. And, that's the only thing that I was like, oh, I was really looking forward to it. But yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, it's like at first I was like, oh, I don't need it. And then I was just like, oh, I've worked really hard for it. And yeah, I mean, I think like that too, just adding a little bit to just like this generation of the youth of like what they're going through. I would not even know how to like handle this as like someone in middle school or like a fifth grader or kindergarten. I mean, all these kids are just gonna have so much, so much to learn from, and they're gonna have this whole experience for the rest of their lives. And I think like our educators and our, the medical folks, right? It's like I think of like my mom being, she was an educator, she was a teacher for so long that I was like telling her like, imagine teaching like this, and she just was like, I don't understand, I wouldn't be able to like keep up. And so my heart goes out to like all those folks in those situations, and they're still doing it. So yeah, still doing it. Yeah, showing up. Somebody's got to. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. And again, thank you for your honesty and your willingness to share. And
you're welcome.
And that concludes our interview. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and let's get together for a hike soon. Let me know.
Yeah, we will. Okay.
Bye.
Welcome. Bye.